In 1840, Thomas Carlyle gave a series of lectures, later compiled into a single work titled On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, which condensed and popularized what would come to be known as Great Man Theory, the idea that universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here. This idea believes that we can examine archetypes like poets, prophets, priests, and kings, and in their actions and qualities find history itself, the motivations and ideals which shaped society. To be as fair as possible to it, the theory is not exactly stating that single individuals determined the whole world as a quick overview seems, but more a refutation of conditions. Rather than a certain time calling for a hero and imparting the right qualities, an individual who was born with those right qualities emerges and takes a moment as their own. While somewhat meritocratic, the theory is often dismissed for being unscientific and glorifying authority, among other issues. I think that dismissal is correct, and the pinned comment will have a few links where you can explore why. Funnily enough, I think looking at a defense of it is actually the best way to disprove it. However, despite possibly never hearing its name before, it might sound familiar to you. When we're taught history, it's under very unideal conditions. With limited time before we're forced to become functional workers, attention divided across so many fronts and an ever-growing book of events to cover, minimal funding, and hatred masking itself as culture war, teaching history is no easy task. It requires an efficient way to cover hundreds of years across mere months, and not just names and places, but social conditions and motivations and understanding of the people so we can try and prevent the same mistakes and replicate the same successes. And the efficient way to do that is with heroes or symbols. To pick a few people and make it their revolution, their war, their history. To place those motivations, conditions, and all of the control onto their shoulders and simplify. As such, history education doesn't endorse but simulates great man theory, imparting on us an almost unconscious idea that history can be recalled by the summaries of select individuals. Robespierre's revolution, or Dr. King's dream, Caesar's conquest, and Stalin's starvation. We sum up the entire crowds of names in those alone. I bring this up because it doesn't just impact your views of the past. If we see so much having been dictated by so few and take that as truth, how will we interact with our own world here and now, the act of writing our own history? It often leads us to follow symbols or heroes. You can kind of interchange these terms. I'm going to be going with symbols here just because I think hero has a different connotation to it that isn't quite what the definition would mean to be. You can use them interchangeably, whichever word you think really fits it best. The term isn't important, it's more about its definition. Now, broadly speaking, a symbol is someone to believe in, but I think that's the kind of vague definition you get annoyed at finding online because it doesn't really say anything concrete. It doesn't offer a further why. For example, say there was a revolutionary who managed to steal the most powerful technology in the world and learned how to use it on their own, turning the created weapons onto the most untouchably powerful oppressors. I could see this person's posters all around, murals marked by their face and colors, and believe in them, but why? What's the generic core at those specific actions? The definition I'd put forward to answer this is, a symbol is someone who proved a motivation worthwhile by taking a consequential action for its sake. So I could believe in that revolutionary because they took a desire I hold, say independence, and proved how powerful that motivation is by using it to perform such an unthinkable action. The desire for freedom was what drove such consequence, and so it must be strong. If I follow the same motivation, I can be a part of similar feats, and with that strength, surely it will win out in the end. I believe in it to guide my actions, a pseudo-fortune teller providing comfort for the future. The symbol then cycles back in on itself as those sharing the motivation feel more emboldened by the success proving strength and will be more comfortable taking actions in line with it, which increases its success, and so on. The missing piece to our understanding was the symbol's own why. Now, this has of course been about Jinx in the second season of Arcane, the internet's favorite chaos gremlin turned revolutionary hero. Once a simple child of the Undercity Zaun, her gentle father's death and adoption by his ambitious foil Silco led Jinx down a chaotic path, turning her weapons against the oppressive Piltover time and time again, culminating in the missile attack on the council at the end of Season 1, which earns her this new status rather quickly. A fledgling desire in the hearts of a few ambitious people is now a widespread motivation flowing through Zaun's veins due to Jinx's own desires being seen. Kind of. When I was first watching Season 2, I had a lot of issues with this. Sure, Jinx was a notable and powerful opposition to Piltover before, but was never really held up as such a hero until this sudden shift, and if you look into her personally, you know that it was never for a revolution anyway. It was for Silco. All those former attacks were just his orders and her enjoyment, and bombing the council wasn't to break Piltover's back, it was to confirm herself. Right before the incident, she had to kill Silco in order to save Vi, and had she not, she would have been forced to kill Vi in order to save Silco. Each one was screaming a different name at her, Powder or Jinx, and trying to pull her to their side. Confused and hurt either way, this was a summary of her life up to this point, being whatever someone else told her she was, even when she tried otherwise. Always being forced to hurt someone when she tried to help, just like when she went to save Vander all those years ago and was finally dubbed Jinx properly. As she thinks of herself, she can only really hurt people. So if this is going to be the case no matter what, as it is with both of these families yelling who she is at her, then she may as well own the chaos and destruction. Shooting that missile at the council is making a definitive statement. This is who I am, the chaos and the conflict, and no one can deny it. No one can tell me who I am, because I just made the most powerful statement myself. For the first time ever, she isn't being pulled in either direction, with Silco dead and Vi admitting that Powder is gone after this. Even if it's people hating her, at least Jinx could finally be someone that she chose on her own. That is her motivation, and so it struck me as almost nonsense that she becomes this symbol of revolution overnight. Was that really deserved? But I think that's part of the point. It wasn't. Because a symbol isn't really tied to reality and the motivations someone actually acts on, things locked away from others and so complex in their mind, but rather in the mind which witnesses them its own experience and logic. Each side is simply strengthening their beliefs around whatever they want Jinx to be. To Zaun, she's the already discussed symbol of revolution because it's most beneficial to see her as such. They can more readily push for their independence with that kind of strength, so you have to believe it was on your side. Into Piltover, she's a symbol of fear, proving that safety can only be achieved with even greater force to match this terrible action. They don't need to undergo such an uncomfortable change as they were about to in granting Zaun independence, because look at what Zaun is pushing for: chaos and destruction. Piltover's idea of Jinx isn't entirely false, but it still misses the appropriate context because it's more comfortable to see it as plain and simple hatred rather than a complex field of emotions. And this makes sense on both sides. Not everyone can actually meet the person behind the symbol and talk with them about their real motivations, which, even if they could, are often only partially known to the individual themselves and very complex to explain. After all, have you ever tried to find the root of your actions and kind of just ended up with, because I want to? Add to this that we're pattern-seeking creatures who need to understand our surroundings as a basic means of survival, and when we can't help but fill in the gaps with whatever information is available, information emerging from the self being the most so. We see the action and in our own minds pull from our own experiences and our own knowledge to try and understand why. So someone seeking rebellion will see that as the answer, and someone seeking status and power will see that as the answer too. This means that our definition from earlier needs some added doubt, which in truth most abstract principles do. However, they're often left off as a forgotten assumption because, well, it sounds a lot worse. If we say a symbol is someone who might have proved a motivation worthwhile by taking a consequential action possibly for its sake, it just doesn't have the same ring to it, but that's what the definition should be. Dealing with the human mind, it will always be subjective, and so we should address it as such. We can use Jinx herself as an example of why it will always have that doubt with her storming of Piltover's Stillwater prison. It's full of revolutionaries due to the raiding of a failed rally, including Jinx's sort of daughter Isha, who actually helped kick off that event. Jinx immediately plans a break to free Isha, which is going to be most efficient if she simply frees everyone being held from that riot since she'd likely be with them. Even if maybe somewhere deep down Jinx wanted to free everyone, they'd more or less just be a consequence of Isha being with them. After all, Jinx has been hiding away from being their symbol this entire time, so why would that suddenly change? And so when she does free them all and steps into view, she says,
"Here I am, your big fat hero."
Which gives away how little she was thinking of this as a revolutionary act. It's not to free people for a cause, it's a statement that makes it a joke, a chaos game, something entertaining to cheer at, not to believe in. And that's because this is what she expected. There's less reason for her to understand such a strong desire for independence from her past. Why should she? Well, she was born and grew up oppressed in Zaun. Her recent years have all been spent at the top of its ladder. The adoptive child of Silco, who more or less had a grudge against everyone, those in Piltover he hated most, but pumping drugs into Zaun to control it as well. Under his rule, Jinx was simply told where to go in order to cause chaos, often providing a criticism for Silco that he was giving her special treatment and causing problems for others like Sevika, who actually fought for change, not pleasure. Whatever mess Jinx caused, she never had to deal with its consequences, and that's a pretty big privilege. She's not on the streets getting roughed up by the enforcers, she's off making greater and greater weapons to steal attention and praise with. Her life in Zaun was fine, why would she want it to change? It would just mean going from extraordinary to average. So, when everyone responds to her chaos statement with a genuine response, of course she's shocked. She had to assume from her experience that everyone simply wanted a bit of chaos, that the revolution was almost a game. After all, isn't that closeness to death a real thrill? She herself is a proof of exactly why they respond so genuinely, because they're doing the same thing to her and assuming her motivations from their own. This is a very powerful thing, and we see how with Isha. Now, the last thing Arcane needed was more characters to develop and tie into its already massive web, but I think this was a good exception because she's simple and focused. Isha isn't really inspired by the symbol of Jinx, but more directly knows and cares for the person who saved her. Essentially a child slave, she's freed when her escape attempt happens upon Jinx, who kills her captors. She's a person who clearly isn't doing it from some high-minded morality, given the interaction ends with a statement about risk's invigoration.
You feel it? Buzzing? Behind your eyes? Best feeling in the world, kid.
And so, to Isha, Jinx isn't some symbol of revolution, but an actual person with mixed and complex motivations who saved her, a person made of chaos and fun who she loves for those reasons. And yet she's also someone who uses the symbol of Jinx more prominently than maybe anyone else. And the reason is for what a symbol is, why we make them in the first place. Easy, effective communication. Look at the rally Sevika tries to hold at the Vander statue. She makes a pretty average speech about unity, appealing to the fact that they don't need to be all these disparate groups first and Zaunites second, but it can be the other way around. Being caught up in their old tribes only makes it easier for Piltover to pick them off as infighting continues in Silco's vacuum. But Jinxers keep asking for Jinx, and everyone stays caught in the specific before the broad once again. Considering Sevika literally had to point out their differences to appeal to their similarities, this seems like an inherent flaw. I mean, they all understand oppression as Zaunites, but first through their own lens. Maybe it's from child labor, a product of Piltover limiting their resources. Maybe from enforcer violence, the violent arm of the upper city, or maybe from Shimmer devastating their life, a high-value, if illegal product for Piltover dwellers like Sallow. These are all oppression, but all different expressions of it. As such, these will be more powerful in their minds in determining what makes a revolution important. They'll either want child safety first, or the enforcers dismantled, or the destruction of Simmer, different views of what liberty entails. So even though they're all united in oppression, they're divided on the different proofs of it in their minds. An appeal like Sevika makes usually will fail due to this fact. She'd have to spend hours offering specific groups specific concessions. However, right after them pushing back against Sevika's appeal, Isha brings the crowd together with a blue flare, the symbol of Jinx. Everyone quiets and slowly raises their hands together in unity. They didn't listen to rational appeals and logic, but did listen to this exactly because it lacked those things. That is, it allowed them to implant their own into it. Each one sees the symbol, something vague and personal, and assumes their version of it, someone who hates oppression for the same reason as them. After all, there's little way to prove yes or no on that front that Jinx feels any differently than you do. And so they all look around and see others doing the same and begin to raise their hands because now they're all united in believing in the same thing without actually doing so. It smooths over the edges between all their different versions of oppression. This is what's so powerful about symbols. They're so personal and yet so nondescript. Instead of having to appeal to everyone at once to support a cause, you just provide them the general framework of something in the right direction and let them fill in the blanks. One message becomes 100 and very small, voiceless causes get to be included somewhere in the mess. Quite literally, as it allows the mute Isha to communicate to an entire crowd at once. It's almost like an unconscious compromise, the agreement to tackle the broad first, which then provides the platform for the specific to be gained. After all, can you fix the child labor issues of Zaun without addressing the class system derived from Piltover which gives it a basis? Can you dismantle the production of Shimmer while a rich aristocrat has an escort painting it on his body in the Overcity? Symbols are a collective voice to reach these broad but required ends for greater things. This is a fitting topic for Arcane, a series centering on the amorality of a scientific discovery, because symbols are the same way. They are not good or bad, they are used for good or bad. And this is probably the intent of Caitlyn's arc in Season 2. Formerly, she was a young and naive enforcer, setting out in her new role to uncover the source of conspiracy, even as her parents tried to keep her on safe duties at home. She actively went against this, willing to risk her own welfare in order to benefit the greater good, a real and pure sense of justice. She may find Zaun's violence intolerable, but she would never punish someone simply for being from Zaun, even if she might naively miss the imbalance which caused it, for example. After all, she's willing to free Vi, a supposedly dangerous Zaunite, in order to better track down the source of this conspiracy, so she cares more about the spirit of the law than the actual text as written, which, well, if you've ever seen me talk about psychopaths, you know I love a character who does that. We need to consider the spirit of the law more. However, Caitlyn herself begins to struggle with this in Season 2, as she's just lost her mother, a counselor in Jinx's attack. This is going to change her, of course. She still has all that idealistic thinking of a small world, but now with the injustice of a large one. And sure, justice is nice, but did justice do anything for her mother? This new vengeance doesn't replace but adapt her former thoughts. How do you reconcile broad justice and personal injustice? She says things like, "I can understand how people hate them now," expressing both sides at once. That she gets it but doesn't want to. But then she'll call them animals after another attack, but also maintain that there needs to be a reason to arrest them, but then also at times making very flimsy reasons for those arrests depending on her situation and mental state. Bouncing back and forth, she's very inconsistent in Season 2, another annoyance. But again, probably part of the point. She's not an inconsistent character, she's an inconsistent person. Caitlyn is stuck between those two opposing mental states, the pure sense of justice and the desire for seeking revenge which wants to kill it. Normally this would cause someone to consolidate, adapting that new experience into the old and moving on, like Vander did. Once a violent revolutionary, he saw that by fanning these flames, he also helped lead to the death of his friends. This is the conflict, which is more important to him, freedom or safety. He determines that the latter is, adopting the now orphaned Vi and Powder, and turning into a man vying for stasis over anything, even cutting a deal with the lead enforcer. You can argue about the rightness of what he did, but there is no argument about what he stood for and how powerful his conviction was, which is why so many people can love him. He put all his efforts in a consistent pattern which he believed was best. Caitlyn becomes hateable for the opposite reason. She divides all her efforts between these two desires, never actually consolidating them and gaining consistency. And it's because of Jinx, the symbol. What Caitlyn has seen of Jinx is a chaotic and evil being, a half-truth from the direct experience she does have in Season 1. When Jinx kidnaps her, she sees the side which is gloating over a room of victims, but is knocked out cold before she can see the more human side which is tortured and pulled apart and crying over her loss either way the situation goes. What she knows of her is only the worst, a chaotic devil. So when she sees all the people in Zaun glorifying her, she has to fill in the gaps with what she knows to answer why, and what she knows is terrible. To her, everyone in Zaun isn't dyeing their hair blue in the name of independence, they're doing it in the name of destruction. This is how she can maintain a belief in the spirit of the law and a very active oppression of Zaun at the same time. If they believe in these things, there's aspects so against the law, then, well, the right option for her strongest belief is actually to fight against them. Leading a strike team into their homes and gassing them out and arresting Jinx's victims isn't against freedom, but for it by tackling so many agents of chaos. Caitlyn can be motivated by both things at once, existing in contradiction rather than finding herself because of the falsehood this symbol allows to feel real. That's the power of a symbol, the difference between Vander turning to kindness and Caitlyn turning to cruelty. Yes, they can communicate a lot of good things and effectively, but they can also allow someone to look past the worst things just the same. This is also how Caitlyn can tell Vi that she won't change for the worse, and then do exactly that without feeling any guilt or shame for it in the moment, because to her, there actually hasn't been any change. She's still following the same core principle for her actions as always after all. She isn't a hypocrite, she's blind. And it's how, despite not being able to examine herself, she can tell Vi exactly who she is because she has to. Because Caitlyn hasn't changed, and so if a change she can feel has happened, such as the decline of their relationship, then it must be from the other side, from Vi. Yes, she can admit that Powder was gone and that Jinx was here to stay, and she can put on the badge and give up a part of herself to help in this hunt, essentially proving her motivations, but when she hampers it by not wanting a child to get hurt, then it must be Vi lying because Caitlyn can't recognize her own lies. Plus, to recognize that Vi is stopping her because she doesn't want a child to be hurt is also to recognize that there's a sense of justice which doesn't consider Jinx as a priority worth all costs, a side which has once seen her as the hurt child now clinging to her, a side which recognizes that Caitlyn might be misinformed and wrong and contradictory and just invaded innocent people on flimsy logic. After months of reinforcing her decisions in cold, hard action, that's not an easy thing to accept. It would almost be like dying, recognizing that the core part of yourself is long dead by your own hand and further buried each day. So she blames and rejects Vi instead, comes up with a reason with the symbol instead. Jinx has really gotten to everyone, huh? She's kind of learned to actively use the symbol for herself, justifying decisions by placing it within them. We see this pretty directly when they later capture Singed, and when interrogating him about his beast, Caitlyn says,
"Tell me what you were planning. How was Jinx involved?"
Even though she isn't at all. Caitlyn isn't just motivated by the symbol anymore, she exists expressly to be its opposite, to need it against her in order to act, reducing herself down just as much as the symbol themselves was. A consequence of this internal contradiction Caitlyn experiences is how impossible it makes sticking around. If someone can't predict your behavior to a reasonable degree, like if touch one day is going to lead to warmth and another way to scorn, how can they know you? How can they love you? We don't need to be perfect, but we do at least need to be able to understand when we're not, and that's something Caitlyn can't do. As such, people like Vi who actually care about her and are hurt by these inconsistencies will be forced out, leaving only space for people who can handle them. And more than likely, those are going to be people who are gaining something from you to make up for that cost. People who are going to use you exactly because your behavior is so unprincipled, and motivation for it so obvious in the symbol. Of course, we're talking about Ambessa, the Noxian Warhawk trying to take Hextech as her own, even if it sinks all of Piltover to do so. Taking Caitlyn under her wing, she slowly brings them all to the brink of disaster, fanning flames from the background in brutal manipulation. This won't be all about her character, but it will be about her relationship to Caitlyn, something which has a very telling origin. The moment where she adapts her plans to slot in Caitlyn is this one here, where she storms into the council and gives them her strike team plan to
locate Jinx, dismantle Shimmer, and neutralize any agents still loyal to Silco.
It's very flashy and impressive with all the new weapons, but In terms of actual logic, well, it's nothing compared to a similar moment in Season 1 where Vi has a whole back and forth with Jayce about essentially the same thing. There she had to appeal to a specific reason why hitting the Shimmer facility was important. Break that leg and the structure on top of it collapses. It's focused and purposeful, one goal for a specific reason, appealing to action by someone who knows, not to politics. Caitlyn is more what you'd expect to hear today. A lot of broad plans, but not much substance as to, well, actually how you'll do it, aside from force in her case. So what Ambessa sees is someone willing to use a lot of force for very little reason. That's one of the problems with a symbol like this being so much of her motivation. It's so known and so obvious that it becomes almost natural to manipulate. It's so easy to read that you could just say Jinx and Caitlyn would say where, I'll get the team. Sometimes we don't want to summarize our motivations so well and easy to communicate because that very thing can come back to manipulate us. Our complexity is sort of like a defense. And the most ironic part is that the way Ambessa capitalizes on this is also by a symbol, by making Caitlyn into one. She gathers the most important families in the council, performs a grand speech with her forces all offered up for control, and on the spot surprises Caitlyn with a nomination. She's the person they need to fill this role. And while shocked, the support of the roused crowd eventually sees her grasping the moment and becoming Piltover's commander. I mean, this is basically Ambessa taking the great man theory and acting it out, saying that someone with these inherent qualities must seize this moment. It's achieved through an extension of reality. The speech Ambessa gives is all about noble families who've supported Piltover for generations, honesty and a sense of justice, a respectable background and career, all things that are true for Caitlyn. The extension is that while those things are true, they don't compose all of her. Much like Jinx, her motivations and actions are a lot wider than this, but a select few are used to justify her as something very specific. She's not just a name and a job, she's a flawed, grieving person behind it all. But that's all washed away in idolization. Now that they've been pulled out and presented to her, or as her, she has to stick to them unless she wants to disappoint the whole city. She's forced into trying even harder, and thus doubting herself even less. She has to dig her hole even deeper, lest everyone loses faith and suffers. By removing the other ones and holding up Caitlyn as a symbol so perfect, Ambessa achieves the opposite effect as what Zaun got. Instead of action, she gets inaction. The powerful people of Piltover need not worry about their safety and the direction of their forces because look at who is in charge of them, the daughter of a noble family who could never be corrupted, filled with only the best of intentions. They can rest assured that their focus on trade or whatever else is entirely justified with this symbol of peace in place. And this leaves a crucial situation with someone easily manipulatable in charge and very few people actually looking out for it. Ambessa can make whatever moves she sees fit in this situation, which helps lead to her swift takeover. This is another way symbols can go. If the motivations they stand for aren't actionable but rather static, then everyone can have the world ripped out from underneath them just like that. They make everything feel fine when nothing could be further from the truth. This idolization of Caitlyn ties everything together. We have Caitlyn the symbol, who became so from Jinx the symbol, a relation which can explain the former's actions once Ambessa has made her final push. When she sets Jinx free by not preventing Vi from doing so, it's because she actually kind of understands her now. After all, she's seen more of her from the attack on Viktor's commune, where Jinx made sure Vi was okay after being attacked and then just handed herself over to be captured. It was a moment of pure and utter chaos, not caused by Jinx, but attempting to be solved by her instead. This is evidence against everything Caitlyn has believed, and even if she can still hate the person who killed her mother, she now has to hate herself from seeing her actions much more true. This broken down woman without the will to live is how she was justifying so much active cruelty. It breaks everything she thought she knew. The only good thing is that her self-hate proves the sense of justice is still alive and in there somewhere.
Hating you? I've hated myself. I just don't have the energy for it any longer.
She knows the person on the other side of the bars probably feels the same as her, given how little she matches up with her idolized image. After all, it's not like either of them chose to be a symbol, chose to have themselves reduced down to just a few probably inaccurate qualities which require a lot of effort, which now make all their actions a matter much larger than one person can handle. Imagine that stress. Jinx was just trying to finally take an action to embrace herself, and immediately it became the stuff of others once again. The chaos that could have been her is not so, but it's hope and rebellion and all these things that she didn't want. If she shows up and does this now, it's going to lead to riots and imprisonment and death. Is it any wonder she hides away when even just Isha dressed as her can get people thrown into still water? How could anyone cope with their very appearance being the stuff of dreams for one side and the target of utter violence for the other? Everyone starts acting with her name in their mouth, like she's responsible for their actions, stealing her image and doing what they want with it. How much toll would this take when you feel responsible for people rotting in prison, when they take a beating because of your color, and when the people you actually love sacrifice themselves to keep you alive because ones you don't know love you instead? A symbol is more important than one person can really handle. And Caitlyn, however blind, simply wanted to deal with her own issues, not lead the entire armed forces of Piltover. She kept her team small and compact, with the consequences of her leadership limited to just a few people who trusted her and who she trusted alike. It was a shame for her that she was such a contradiction, but at least as far as Piltover is concerned, that was all. When Ambessa makes the whole grand speech and places her at the center of it though, it extends that to the entire city. And what was she supposed to do? Say no with everyone watching and make her own battle even harder from a lack of motivation and support? It's a very strong-armed decision where the only way is forward. This is part of what makes her contradiction even worse. Now she's fighting for a whole city instead of just 4 people. She has to be firm in her convictions or else a lot more people waver too. The only direction is forward. And then they finally catch Jinx, and everything turns over and flips apart, questions returning and the motivation faltering, a simple world rapidly returning to its complex truth. And that's the thing at the end of the day. A symbol has to simplify because the world is way too complex to get along at such a large scale. And the people it comes from become the arbiters of that, either acting in bad faith or realizing that they have no such authority and yet having to enact it anyway to deal with the stress. Evil people gain easy power, and good people are chewed up and spat out. Just as Jinx was worsened from being a symbol, so was Caitlyn. It's inherent to what one is. It exhausts them and wears them out, leaving them on opposite sides of the bars, but feeling such similar things. It's almost like treating someone this way condenses them down, takes the importance which should be spread out across an entire lifespan, and forces it to come into such a short one instead. Now, I don't think that there's some kind of energy or fate or anything like that to life, but I do think it seems pretty nonsensical to believe that one human can truly handle being responsible for so many lives when our bodies and minds were never made for such a thing, even across all those 70, 80 years. I think actually recognizing the horror of that would break any good person and would be the exact reason why a bad person takes it on. These people shouldn't, can't, and were never meant to mean so much alone. But there's such an allure to it, our pattern-loving minds crafting narratives about these idols, getting enveloped in their drama. We can't help but connect the dots into the most interesting picture. And when everything seems to rest on the shoulders of a few great men, well, it's actually a comfort either way. If you want to be one of those great people, then you will surely be one from the qualities being born into you, right? And if it doesn't happen, well then it was just never meant to anyway. And maybe that's even better because you can relax. Better people are in place. No matter what happens, this idea cycles back in on itself and allows us to feel content. We raise up so few and then remember even fewer. The very idea of great men creating the so-called proof of it. Why are there so few? Maybe exactly because we choose to remember so few. Maybe because that's what feels easiest both now and then. We can't cast off the idea entirely. As we saw, it's crucial to unity in action, but we do have to be aware of the idea's extent to ensure it's being used correctly, and to know how it will be used against us as well. And when the moment isn't so dire, we need to let it rest and remember those 99% of names that will never even make the index of the history books. And this is why I actually have a little bit of faith in Arcane's rushed cycle of violence ending, where Sevika is appointed to the council to represent Zaun. I think that's part of the lesson being learned, because while it's not a name that anyone knew, it's a name that made the others possible. While Silco was held up in his office planning the next steps, she was actually out in the field making the decided ones happen. One of the best moments of Season 1 is when the council is turning on him, the kind of people who in Season 2 lead to that whole power vacuum and infighting that makes their revolution so much harder to see through. Sevika is the one who shows them what's up and saves Silco and lets everything keep functioning under one leader and be very effective. If it's not for her, then the symbol Jinx never happens. And that's not even mentioning the fact that while Jinx was out there causing chaos and gathering attention, Sevika was the one left behind to clean up all the messes and make Jinx's existence possible. She always complained to Silco about that because she had to do it so much. And at the same time, she's someone who can embrace the fact that she isn't the face of their progress. Because originally she hated Jinx, in Season 1 claiming time and time again that Silco needed to axe her and move on for the sake of everyone else. But then, in Season 2, once Jinx is exactly why so many people believe and are out there acting, she has to change her mind, willing to accept all of that if it means others will be out there inspired to act as well. We see that in her refusing to give up Jinx in exchange to Piltover. This arrangement might even be better for her. She can mess up and not doom the entire revolution exactly because she isn't its face. She's not perfect. That failed rally was because she didn't know what the crowd needed to hear, but it'll be long forgotten under blue murals, a leader gaining the experience they need without being destroyed for doing so. And while everyone else stares up at all those murals to guide their feelings into the future, their ability to follow through on them will be overseen by someone who was there through every single step making it happen. Someone who will approach the council with apprehension, not to make friends or be a name, but maybe even exactly so that such big names don't need to be. It's not that we need to get rid of symbols entirely. They are a large part of how the voiceless speak in this unideal, unequal world. We can't forget that fact. But we also can't let them be everything or become all of us. We need to use them with the knowledge of what they are and why they are, and back them up with good people who know this too. They're the start, but they aren't the end. The end is a world where they never exist.